Welcome to GBN America. I am Bev Turner, and this is the fourth in our series, The Future of America. It's the fourth debate, and today we're focusing largely on foreign policy under Donald Trump. What might that look like? Is the US going to leave NATO, or is it going to stay in NATO? Is it going to continue to send aid to Ukraine or force peace talks? President-elect Donald Trump has promised to put a stop to endless wars around the world and adopt a more America-first approach to foreign policy, which has the UK and the EU bracing for potential impact. So here to debate the possible benefits of Trump policies, promising to make America bold again. I'm joined by Jason Beardsley, Green Beret and Navy veteran. He's also a former Senior Department of Defense Advisor. And also Gerard Filitti, a Lawfare Project Senior Counsel. Thank you both there. Apologies for falling over your name a bit there, Gerard. Right, now, let me tell you, I'm going to bring to this my British perspective, because what's so interesting doing these debates is how many of the issues that you're facing in America are exactly the same here in the UK in terms of policy, in terms of the pinch points, in terms of the flashpoints, actually, that cause debate and division. So, Jason, let me start with you as our Democrat. Is Trump going to take a more isolationist approach to politics? And is that going to be in the best interests of America, but perhaps cause more issues on the global stage?
Well, let me first do a little business up front. I'm not a Democrat, and it was served in the former Trump administration. And I would just reject kind of up front the notion that isolationism is the cause of America first. I think that's a bit pejorative. And I think what the American people said during the election is not so much that we are retreating from global leadership as much as we intend to do leadership smartly. That's deployment of our forces with something in mind that is redounds to the success or the benefit of the American people. And as you opened up, Bev, the American people are feeling the pinch of inflation, borders that are not controlled, fentanyl crisis is here at home, and the cost of groceries has gone up. So when we're feeling that at the local level, we spoke at the election, or our American constituents did, and said, we want a leadership that's different. I'm a soldier that fought in the endless wars that you've seen. So decades worth of fighting in blood and treasure, lost in the sands of Iraq and in Afghanistan, only to turn those back over to our enemies. So a lot of Americans are starting to question the wisdom of what has been a primacist or interventionist type policy in the past. And they've said, we want something different.
Apologies, Jason, for casting you as a Democrat if that's not how you see yourself. Can I ask you, sort of politically, do you align yourself with any party or any kind of left-wing dichotomy that you recognise?
No, I'm. I'm very much an American, America first type, and but I think with alignment per se, you tend to box yourself in. Where I think in America we're learning a lot more about how to see the politicians as something different than either Republican or Democrat, and start to look at them more about how their practical policies hit us. And I'd say as a soldier too, we had to fight under both administrations, so I can see the wisdom on both sides. The idea now is how do we synchronize that?
It's so interesting because it's the same thing here, Jason. This idea of left and right has kind of disappeared. It's sort of become pointless, really, post, I would say, arguably, maybe perhaps before, but very much post the pandemic, the so-called pandemic. This idea that you could be politically left, politically right seems a little sort of, it's not really fit for purpose anymore in 2024. But nevertheless, let's talk about Trump and perhaps his sort of unilateralism, the way that he talks. He's a bit more skeptical, isn't he, about alliances, and that must be reassuring for the American people. I'd love to have a leader here who says, I'm going to put the UK first for a change, rather than other European countries or other war zones which feel a long way away in the Middle East, and feels like we want Britain to be first. And Trump's going to do that for you, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons he was so resoundingly elected, is that the American people are tired of listening to politicians who are convincing us of the wherewithal of being deployed everywhere for every cause at the cost of the American tax dollar. And here comes President Trump to say, we should not be involved in endless conflicts that are not redounding to the success of every American. So do you feel it in Wisconsin? Can you feel it in Ohio? Do the constituents feel the successes there? And again, It's very hard when we turn these stages over, these places like Kabul and Afghanistan, to an enemy, the Taliban, or when we leave Iraq and we hand it over to the Shia government that is now taking money from Iran and filtering that down to the popular mobilization forces, which then turn their guns on the American soldiers who are currently in Iraq right now. So we're funding two sides of a war. Meanwhile, over in Syria, you've got CIA funded and backed rebels that came out of al-Nusra and Jabhat al-Nusra and other al-Qaeda factions that have rebranded, taken Damascus. So we are now looking at being squeezed on three fronts there with a very small needle to thread in between. America just looks at that and says, we don't understand it. We're not sure what the victory is here. And President Trump knows how to speak clearly about those issues. When a lot of politicians get lost in rhetoric, that doesn't count anymore. It's not working. It's not penetrating. And I think people are fed up with that.
We are looking at this issue and seeing our engagement abroad in simpler terms. What is the benefit to America and to Americans by our engagement in any specific issue? When we are putting our economy, our resources, our manpower into something, but we don't seem to be getting any advantage for it, and we're doing it gratuitously, and what we're feeding is a system that targets us, that creates terrorist states, that creates economic challenges to us, we're just not seeing that benefit. And when we're not seeing that benefit, that's interpreted as isolationism, but it's not. It's smart and strategic involvement to actually know what we can cooperate on with the rest of the world, what it takes to actually have a benefit for Americans, so that we're seeing an advancement in our society, not just sending our resources overseas.
Obviously, one of the big issues is going to be Ukraine and Russia. Biden has said quite clearly that he was just prepared, and we've had the same here from our Prime Minister, that frankly, no money is too much money in order for Ukraine to win this war, whatever that looks like. And of course, Trump has come in with a very different position on this. He's already had talks with Zelensky and President Macron of France behind closed doors. We don't quite know how that went, but we do know that Trump has a very different position on this and certainly has a closer relationship with Putin. Gerard, how do you see that panning out under a Trump presidency?
It's a very good question because there's a lot of lack of clarity on what can actually be achieved in the short term. Both Zelensky and Putin are in this fight to win it at this point in time. And while we have seen movements from Zelensky to be willing to come to the table and in theory at least give up some land for a peace, that is much harder to implement. So Donald Trump coming in, he needs to exert pressure on both sides. He needs to find a way to bring Putin to the table as well. Putin doesn't have all that much to lose in his thinking at the current point in time. He sees a long-term strategic advantage to keeping up the fight. So it's not an easy issue because American involvement, Western aid flowing into Ukraine has been substantial. But when we're not seeing progression on that front, when we're just seeing a static battlefield that is slowly shifting in favor of the Russians, that makes it difficult to see the benefit of continuing the fight and more beneficial to put pressure on both sides to resolve the conflict.
Jason, you've got the military experience. Do you look at that through slightly different eyes as a former soldier of what that idea of peace could look like?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, first and foremost, I think what President Trump sees clearly that maybe took me actually being in combat over years to learn is that these fights, if they're not clearly articulated from the outset, and they have the resources to win, those are two different things, they're not going anywhere. And we wasted, again, 20 years, decades worth of blood and treasure in places where we had unlimited equipment, unlimited technology, unlimited resources, and notice that we didn't either win in Baghdad or in Kabul. So what I think the president is looking at is, number one, our generals don't know how to win wars anymore. Okay, so then you look at Ukraine, whose resources are limited, whose spirit is limited, and they're going up against a very long-term enemy that's got resources that they can continue to produce. Russia, for all of its downsides in war, has always been the same Russia. They fight with numbers. They have the numbers to kind of outmatch or outlast you, and they knew that going in. And it should be reminded to our audience that they haven't gained any territory. They're holding the territory they've had since 2014, which Ukraine essentially by proxy kind of gave up. So we're not actually going to win or lose anything here. But in the meantime, we've spent 500,000 bodies on each side to get there. I think what President Trump is going to say is, neither of these two want to continue that grind. There is a way out here, but it's going to mean that the West has got to take the foot off the gas, stop fueling and funding endless generations of Ukrainian men that are going into this grinder.
What is the mood in America about Russia and Ukraine? Because, of course, here we had a very generous kind of, we will welcome Ukrainians here when this war started. People were literally giving their spare rooms. I mean, that was unprecedented in my lifetime, to people that want to come over from Ukraine. And now the patience, I think, is running a little thin, because I don't think we realised quite how much taxpayers' money was going to be funneled over to Zelensky, who prior to the Russian invasion was considered to be one of the most corrupt regimes in Europe. That was readily known, that they weren't necessarily to be trusted. There wasn't an awful lot of knowledge about how America had parachuted him in, but anyway, that's another story. But there is more awareness now of what the situation is in Ukraine and how much more nuance there is around that. Is it similar in America?
Yeah, absolutely. In ways, what we can give credit to is the idea of whipping a fervor up to support Ukraine was something that was phenomenally successful, and it was an emotional appeal. People love freedom. Everybody loves the idea of a win that they can get behind. The United States of America, supporting partners. But what was lacking in that conversation from the outset was the possibilities, the realistic, pragmatic possibilities. And what nobody did was sit down with the American people and say, here's what cost of victory, whatever terms you define, will look like. And over time, the Americans have seen through, just like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, the politicians aren't coming to us with the truth. There was no victory here ever prepared for. And for all the money we spent on it, the lines haven't moved. And so what America sees at the end of that is, once again, they've been duped. And this is where the kind of the feelings begin to turn. Now, there's still a lot of people that support this, but in the end, we have to think about the humanitarian effects and the rebuild after this, which is going to be just as expensive or more than the actual war itself.
Well, as one of your politicians said, I can't remember who it was now, you can correct me if you know, this, we aren't giving this money to Ukraine. This is a loan, because all of the building contracts will go to America. I mean, it's sort of dystopian, really, isn't it? I mean, at least he was telling us the truth for once. That made a nice change. Shall we turn to the Middle East as well then, Gerard? Israel, Palestine, the Middle East, the tinderbox. We've just had Bashar al-Assad overthrown in Syria, which some are saying, well, for here in Europe, we're hearing, well, this is going to perhaps bring some sort of stability now with Syria in the... I know, I can see you laughing. Do you have faith that that is going to be the outcome in Syria?
I have faith that what we will see in Syria is what we have seen in other countries where there has been violent regime change, which is a playing ground of multiple terrorist organizations vying for power, vying for control, vying for resources, and leading to a humanitarian crisis larger than what we've seen today, potentially another migrant wave sweeping Europe and America, and basically conditions that are ripe for more influence of bad actors. A playing ground, Russia is still very much involved there. They have a strategic base on the Mediterranean. They have an airfield there that they need, so they will continue to be involved. Iran is not giving up on Syria. They need that buffer to their country, and as a means of funding and channeling resources to their terrorist organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas. Syria is not improving for the better. This is not a democratic regime that is likely to take over. This is a designated U.S. terrorist who we are now looking to appease and make a deal with, take off the terrorist list, just so that he can organize a government. This is not a path forward that is beneficial by any means to regional stability or to the Western world.
And Jason, you're nodding in agreement there with that analysis of the Middle East. Just tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, Gerard hits this on the head. You've got Mubarak, you've got Gaddafi, you've got Saddam Hussein, examples of regime change that were promoted to the American people as, Arab Spring or, the next generation of democracy. We were supposed to see the Ba'athists in Iraq, removed from power, and that democracy would sweep the region. And then same thing in Afghanistan. Again, we handed that back to the Taliban. And these organizations that are now in control of Damascus have long histories, and anybody can look that up. These are funded, trained, backed brands of al-Qaeda or Sunni Islamist fundamentalists who have been in the process of implementing Sharia law, minority oppression and repression in places like Idlib and Aleppo, and they had a bloody trail behind them, not to mention the fact that this stirs up again, Turkish, are allies of NATO who are hoping to press in on the Kurds, which the Americans are hand in glove with. We've got 3 and 4 and 5 sides of a proxy war happening here. And to Gerard's point, you've got Russia who's still involved. You've got Turkey. You've got Iran. Meanwhile, Israel, which just got through a nice decimation of Hezbollah and Hamas, the region is not stable. What Donald Trump said in his tweet, President Trump says, this is not our war. Stay out. Let it play out. That's probably the wisest thing we've heard from a statesman in, I don't know how long, 80 years. Because the mistake is that we should be first and foremost picking sides in every conflict when we don't know where these go. And if you look across the region to Tunisia and Libya and now Syria and places like Lebanon, you'll recognize the handprint of when empire gets too aggressive. And that's part of what I think Gerard was cautioning, and I agree with.
I'd love to hear your take, guys, on the NATO situation. Donald Trump has said that America leaving NATO is on the table. But of course, at his heart, he is a negotiator. He's a businessman. There's always a deal being done. So you have to take some of what he says as preliminary steps to an outcome that he wants. Do you think what he's really going to conclude, Gerard, is that the US will stay in NATO, but they don't want to be seen to be bankrolling it, and that as long as other countries pay their fair share, then that alliance will remain?
It's not just about bankrolling it, it's also about directionality and the direction that NATO is heading in, whether it's support for Ukraine or even expanding its region of interest to include the Middle East by focusing assets on that area as well, because Turkey, let's not forget, it's a NATO ally. I think what Donald Trump is doing is he's not looking to leave NATO, he's looking to put pressure on NATO to reform, to change, and for other countries to pay their fair share, which has actually benefited them when you think about it, because with this Ukraine crisis, European countries are waking up to the fact that they still have a massive military threat on their doorstep. Yeah. And if they're not investing in their own military, they can't necessarily count on someone else coming to bail them out like the United States did, like Britain did in World War II. So this has been a fundamental jumpstart to Poland, to Romania, to other countries in Europe that realize the need to improve their armed services, contribute more to their defense spending, and basically reform their systems. Trump has been playing this smart. It shouldn't be America coming to the rescue of the world. It should be the world being able to stand up for itself.
And do you think, Jason, that Donald Trump has got the right people around him to make these correct sort of decisions when it comes to a defence perspective and the military situation? Because here in the UK, we're often hearing, we need more funding for our military. We're very vulnerable here. We're a tiny little island, and we think we're really powerful, and maybe we're not as powerful as we used to be, and with potential upset from all sorts of countries, not least Russia, China, and so on, that we are, and Iran, and that we are very vulnerable here. America isn't vulnerable in the same way, but do you have the similar conversations there about whether you are funding your services enough?
Yes, in fact, that's been a stress point for Americans for a long time. Americans love their military. I mean, beyond all the other institutions, we still have trust in the military. Some of that gets eroded when we do these endless wars. But at the end of the day, nobody wants to see our service members underfunded. The difference is funding, irrespective of cause, is different. And Americans recognize that as waste, maybe not quite fraud, but abuse for certain. So what I think what President Trump is assembling are people around him in the leadership roles that will challenge the habitual national security, let's call it inertia, to just expand for no other reason than the cause of expansion. What I think the president is going to highlight is transformation and reformation has to be something that is from the inside out. So whether it's recruiting or whether it's stabilizing our force or the right posture, those things are not easy to do in this environment because you are going to have to break with habit. Habit is grow bigger, increase footprint. And now you've got folks like Steve Feinberg who are going to be looking at how do we challenge the major primes that have been in the contract loop for 20 years and bring innovation to a Department of Defense that takes too long to procure, too long to sustain, and too long to acquire new equipment, especially as we face technology challenges. You've got guys like Pete Hegseth, the inbound Secretary of Defense, who are not going to look at things traditionally and recognize that we've lost something inside the last 20 years that has put our military at risk. And to change that is not easy to do. So you see a lot of the American elite roiling at these picks and saying they're not qualified, or they won't have this, or they won't have that. But what President Trump is doing is something completely different. He's the executive officer. He gets to decide the direction, and he's going to pick people around him that will actually commit to that direction, which was different than what we saw in the first administration. So I applaud that leadership. It's bold. It's going to scare the hell out of people. But at the end of that, growth comes through pain. And if we don't have some pain and looking at these things wisely, we're not going to see something different in this century as we go forward.
It is exciting. I think it's incredibly exciting. And from January the 20th, we're going to know how the world is going to be shaped differently in the image that Donald Trump has in his mind. The fact that he's invited Xi Jinping to the inauguration is quite amazing, isn't it, Gerard? In that, to have the Chinese leader sat there. Now, I was thinking about the psychology, and with Donald Trump, it's quite easy to read his psychology, isn't it? Like, he's going to be bringing some, let's call it, big D energy that day. He's going to have some main character player energy that day, and he's going to want anybody that's his enemy sat there watching and going, look how amazing I am. Just bring it on, take it on. So I kind of understand why he'd want to have him there. And I think it's a very powerful statement of bridge building, actually, in troubled times. Do you?
It's bridge building. It's not personal. We will invite you. We will include you. But don't make any mistake about who is in charge. I'm the one on the podium. I'm the one being sworn in. This massive display of military might and government behind me. This is what I bring to the table. And you're just sitting there watching. I think that's the message that Donald Trump is sending. And it's a powerful message. We will welcome you to the table, but we're not sitting you at the head of the table. We're at the head of the table. And that's a distinct difference from what we've seen in many years of foreign policy by Biden, by Obama before him. It's a complete change. And that is a change that will probably take us in the right direction.
And that's part of his strength of Donald Trump, Jason, isn't it? It's this idea that he is the arbiter of good and bad and powerful and weak. When he was recently in Paris at Notre Dame, the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral, and he saw Prince William there, and he said, yeah, he's doing a good job. He's doing a good job. And I thought, it takes some testicles to tell the Prince of Wales, doesn't it, that he's doing a good job?
Yeah, I mean, this makes more sense to people in the streets. Our common vernacular is filled with this. So we get this psychology from a person-to-person level. It's just when you elevate it to the rhetoric of elite status that it's confusing to the academics. But in reality, the other piece that President Trump is doing with Xi Jinping is he's pulling a bit of a de Tocqueville move here. And he's showing him, Xi Jinping, directly to the heart and the people and the power of America. That's everybody that's going to be out on the mall. And he knows something that Xi Jinping cannot do, which is to rally from an emotional base the support, the spiritual energy of the people behind these movements. And what Donald Trump is saying is, right behind my big military, right behind the big stick that I can throw at you is this. And at the end of this is a deep reservoir of goodwill and people that are willing to help out. But when you cross us, as they say, you wake the sleeping giant. And that's what he's showing Xi Jinping in this move.
And it's a very powerful combination. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on GBN America. Gerard Filitti and Jason Beardsley. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, gentlemen. We look forward to 2025 and all the magic that's going to happen. Thanks so much.
Exciting times.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bev.